So it's really nice to be here tonight. So my first question is actually for Brigid. And Brigid and I work together in West Hartford. And when I first met you, Brigid, your work was mainly sculptural. So my first question is, can you tell us about your journey from your previous work to this new work that's more representational? So talk about the transition and how current events or the current climate has influenced that change.
Well, I have worked in sculpture as a focus for years, and done drawing and painting, but sculpture was really the main thing, and installations. The work was abstract, and I find that over the last couple of years, I turned my attention to just what's going on in our society, and it's hard to escape with the media, kind of surround sound media. So I wanted to be more to make the work more accessible to everyone, and I think that also part of it formally is that I didn't really apply color to my sculpture. I'd use the innate color of the materials, and this was an opportunity for me to use color and to be to just be to use realism to try to communicate a situation. So that's where that comes from in part. I think that throughout, whether it's sculpture, drawing, or painting, and whether it's kind of a social commentary or dealing with social justice, it's a broad view of our humanity. And at this point, I think the work that's in the gallery is about this historical moment. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. So Talya, you also had a very successful career in three-dimensional work, working with fine art, jewelry, sculptural works. So can you talk about your transition from that work to the two-dimensional paintings, and also how your jewelry work has influenced the paintings?
Okay, my jewelry work and my sculpture work were not typical jewelry work. It was not about material, preciousness and so on. So to me, that work that I did with the jewelry and with sculpture as well was very much about the material and the shapes and using wire and the transition and texture. And I have a piece here just to give you a sense for how much, I don't know if this shows, but how much it actually connects very directly, really, to my painting. And when I kind of owe my painting or the transition to a painter and teacher in Maine by the name of Steve Imony, who I met when we went to Maine, and he saw something in that, in the jewelry, in the texture, in the compositions, in the layering, and so on. And he says, you really need to paint. And I was ready for a change. I had been doing it for about 30 years. And so I said, hey, what the hell? Let me try. And I took a few workshops with him. So, and so I kind of plunged into working with just a different material. I don't know if anything happened here, but it seems, oh, okay. The whole essence of line and shape or form in the 3D was about wire and the connection of wire within the textures or the way it hung. And then in the paintings and drawings, line is really, really important. It's sort of my first love. And paint seems to be what I mess around with to go over lines and let lines come in and come out. And when I look back in the jewelry, I really did the same thing. So the voice is sort of the voice, and it seems to be a lot of cross-pollination between the sculpture, which was wire and paper, and the connective tissue. And now the paint feels like connective tissue to me. So, so that's the transition. The one thing that was different is the jewelry and the sculpture was in 3D. So you have an additional dimension to work with. Whereas, or at least my choice in painting has been to actually restrict myself to the square or the rectangle. So the new struggle was how to make compositions work within that restriction. And that has been challenging, and because I wasn't used to it, because with the other thing I could go off, and I can go off, but I don't love going off. I really want to contain it within those, at the moment, within those two shapes, or forms. So I hope that kind of answers it. The one other thing, I'm sorry, one other thing I want to say about the jewelry, the jewelry was sold, you know, I had a fair amount of galleries and I had a lot of shows as well, but I also did a fair amount of my selling in craft shows. And in the craft shows, you meet your collectors and they come back, you know. So there's a very intimate, wonderful connection with the people who buy and wear your work. So there's a certain intimacy to that, which is slightly different from painting, even though when they have it in their house and so on, that's very meaningful. But there's something about the jewelry that it was a wonderful connection to. So that's another difference.
Thank you. It's really great to see the actual piece and to see the connections between the piece and the paintings. So my next question is for Brigid. With these pieces, I'm really interested in the process and the materials, because they are on a more non-traditional surface. So can you tell us about your process? Where do these pieces start? How do you find your materials?
Well, sure. I wanted to also just following up on what I said earlier, there are basically three themes that I think Carl referred to. One is COVID-19. One is about immigration and separating children from their families, and then the other one is about mental health, and the last one that is about my experience. I'm originally from Buffalo, New York, and there's the H.H. Richardson building there that's a national landmark. It was designed to be the Buffalo insane asylum originally. And oddly enough, I mean, I don't know if that's really the correct way to put it, but it stopped being the Buffalo Psychiatric Center in the 70s, and it was empty for years. And then a group developed it, and they were state and federal funding, and it became this very deluxe hotel. So, I mean, life is just kind of funny, because I remember going to high school and passing this building every day back, you know, in the 60s. So, and it's a beautiful building, and it's kind of an unusual story. So this series is dedicated to the people that lived and perhaps died there. And so that, and the piece that you see on the top, that obviously relates to COVID. The process, most of these pieces are on a polymer film that's used in graphic design. It's archival. It's called Dura-lar, and it's like an acetate, except for the fact that it's archival. It doesn't crack. It doesn't yellow. And I really like the way that the paint, I use acrylic, and I really like the way the paint kind of slips onto the surface. And it, so with canvas or with paper, you know, you've got absorbency. So it's just a different feeling. Also, I think that the colors are very, become very almost translucent in a way, you know, a little bit more saturated perhaps, or vibrant. So the large pieces are all this polymer film. And then, you know, there may be one or two small pieces that are on the what's called Yupo paper, that is also kind of a plastic product, which is also really nice to paint on. And that, yes, that's what that piece is. The theme, so the story behind the immigration series is, this is probably a year and a half ago, there were some legislators, politicians had visited the southern border in detention centers, and here we are again, and it's never really, I don't know that it's ever really changed, but the fact that here we are again with immigration being the kind of a hot topic. So there were stories that came back, and they were on the news, and about, you know, about how women that were in detention asked for water, and then they were told that they could drink out of the toilet. That's where that piece came from. That children were taking care of babies, and that there wasn't soap. And so that there are a certain number, tragically high number of people that die in the Chihuahua Desert. So this was all these are all like stories in my mind, and I, you know, this series came out of that, you know, being so, and my intention is that the viewer would feel the connection to this, that this is real, and just the tragedy of it, and the suffering, the human suffering. And so that's was what compelled me to start with this, to move to this kind of social justice or consciousness, you know, in the work, which is a big change, you know, to be that direct was a big change for me. So though it's fairly physical to do the work. I mean, you know, if I want to change something, I have to scrape the paint off. What you see here, the piece with the toilet and the cups, I wrote in Spanish on it, and you can actually see through it, you know. And again, just the fact that I was using color, and that really I didn't apply any color to my sculpture unless there was color in the material, say the wood or the yarn. So this was something that I really enjoyed, working with color, you know, something new, another new aspect to the work. Yeah.
And the work is also transparent. You can see through it. So what do you feel that adds to the pieces?
Well, I think that's kind of making it part of the environment in a way, making it kind of connect with the environment visually. Originally in my studio, I had them hanging out from the wall, and you could see through one to the other. And as I continued with the second series, which is the Quality of Mercy, which is about mental health and starts with the Buffalo Psychiatric Center. Those are 6 pieces, and they became less and less transparent, I would say. So I think that, going back to your question, being able to see through them. Originally, I had thought that maybe you could walk behind them, you know, but I've found that they work just fine against a wall. Okay, so I would say that the material itself kind of it enhances, I don't know if that's the best word, the color, you know, and really ups the color. Yeah. So this is one of the pieces from the quality of mercy and mental health.
Yeah. Thank you. So Talya, I also have a question about process for you. Can you talk about how your pieces start? So what materials and colors are you interested in? When I first saw your work, I was really drawn to the more limited color palette. So can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, which, you know, one thing that Brigid said, I also, the new thing for me with painting was the ability to use more color. Even though I use color in a patina type way on the metal, this allowed me a new freedom, even though I definitely am very much a limited palette painter. And so the process, especially with this, you know, body of work that's at the show, is primarily begins with ink. I use a lot. I use sumi ink and I use walnut ink, and I create like a bit of an armature in a way, you know, to the painting with the marks, with the ink, and then I start bringing in the paint, and then it's a dialogue between the paint and the ink, and then, you know, from an ink line it goes into a paint line, and I love the lines going in and out and sort of puncturing the skin which the paint is. So that's kind of the process, and it's a dialogue of sometimes an excavation to reveal something that is behind, and a fair amount of layering. These pieces less so than other work, but layering is something that I'm very interested in excavation, and I mostly, you know, I would never describe myself as a landscape painter, but at all. But because I'm definitely interested in abstraction and in just suggestions of things, rather than seeing exactly what it is that, you know, you want to try and say, for me. So, but I can see how much landscape, whether it's in nature or in urban landscape, how much of it really I have been borrowing and stealing, you know. I love things like looking at, you know, the road repairs, the lines in road repairs in the city, and then when the snow is inside the little cracks, and all these things kind of filter in, or the ice sheets that are broken on the river, and naked, you know, naked branches. So I don't intend to show them in that context, but I see how they come out. So I kind of think of it as like an inner landscape, which is what, you know, what I think comes out. And it's for me, it's about a dialogue that happens not only between the line and shapes and texture, but also the struggle and the dialogue between me and what is happening. And sometimes one of the best things is when you're really best and tough is when you're really stuck and you're so in love with a little portion of it, and you work very hard to make that portion work with the rest of it, and then you have to be very brave and see that no, you have to cover it up or get rid of it and start again. So that's sort of a wonderful part of finding that bravery at times. And it does take that, because you just don't want to kill those things, those little precious things that you think are so important. And I think a lot of painters I've discovered feel that way, and when they're struggling with a composition. So unintended compositions is sort of a very interesting thing to me. As I said, like the road repairs or a mended seam on a garment or things like that. They are, you can see the sun is coming right at me. I will correct that in a minute. They sort of are discoveries. And I find that allows me to grow and expand, you know, my vocabulary. So I'm going to go and shut up now and go take down the blind. I'll be right back. Who knew? Hi.
Okay.
Sorry for the unintended light. Yeah.
Talya, I think you have a nice tension here between the organic and the geometric. Your use of the grid is very powerful, and it balances out the work of all 9, you know, segments really well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find your work very poetic, like finding these small moments to focus on, like the cracks in the sidewalk, or even if it's not, you know, something that you're painting, you know, directly, the reference that I see in the pieces after, you know, they're finished, it's just like a small moment that's very poetic. Oh, I think this might be Erika.
Thank you.
And I think there's a lot of connection between your process and Brigid's with the idea of scraping away. It's both of you have a very physical way of painting.
Yeah, I think Brigid's work is much more precise. So I can see that for her, scraping away is a much bigger deal than for me, because I can, you know, add more paint or, you know, cover up and do other kinds of excavations, but you're extremely precise. I mean, the work, so it's got to be much harder in that respect anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, I find that you know, it's just something, the precision is something I haven't really been able to let go of. But yeah.
Hello, Erika.
I thought I heard Erika come in.
Hi.
Oh,
sorry for being late.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you all?
We're good.
Great.
All right. So, welcome. So Erika, we have been talking about process and you know, the journey from working 3-dimensionally to 2-dimensionally. So for your work, you've been working with photography for a few years, right?
Yeah.
So tell us about this series that you're working on. How did it start? And has it evolved since the pandemic began?
Yeah. So it actually, I started shooting it when I moved up to Connecticut originally. I'm originally from Miami, Florida. I moved up here for school, and around the time that I graduated, which was 2016, I started to just take pictures of my family, but I wasn't taking any of the portraits seriously. It was just kind of for me because I missed them and we were so far away from each other. And then when I went back, I believe it was 2017 or 2018, I started kind of reviewing the images and realizing, oh, I'm doing something here and it's has a purpose, and maybe I haven't defined it yet, but it definitely needed to be defined. And that's when I started realizing the common string of things happening in those images was I wasn't looking for necessarily the happy, smiling family posing and forcing everyone to come together. I was just enjoying those silent, ever-passing moments that come very often but leave so quickly. And I truly enjoy seeing my family in that light and just seeing them as who they are, or lost in thought, or happy, or angry, or sad, or maybe absolutely nothing. And I think there's some kind of beauty in slowing down and capturing those moments.
Great. So has this changed since the pandemic began?
Yeah, it's definitely been difficult. My mother and the majority of my immediate family is actually diabetic, type 1. So they're very high risk, and we've taken it very seriously. So I haven't been able to see them since December of 2019, unfortunately. It's been rough, and there's a lot of nieces and nephews, so they're growing up fast, and it's unfortunate to not be there. So it's made it really difficult. I can't really shoot. There's a lot of FaceTime images of the same kind of stuff I've been doing here, which is funny because I hadn't realized I was doing that either until I reviewed my album, and I was like, I'm still doing it over FaceTime. But hopefully soon. Most of them have been vaccinated. We're just waiting on me at this point.
Yeah, I think that's been really hard. But I'm glad that you're still able to see them like over FaceTime. And it's interesting that the work is similar, like the FaceTime images and these images. So what specifically are you looking for? Like in your artist talk, you talk about that moment where it's a passing moment. How do you know when you've found that in an image?
So for me, it's mostly, there's a few that some of the newer work is a little more emotional. So like the photo I have of one of the girls screaming, but in the beginning, it was more of like that moment where you notice someone has just completely left a conversation, completely has stopped being a part of a group setting and has found some level of solace or introspection. And it comes really quick, and it's gone just as quick. So in the beginning, I didn't really know what I was doing until I started to edit my images and realize like, oh, I'm actively waiting for these moments. At first, not knowing that I was, and now it's incredibly intentional, but I still make it a point that it's just as quickly as those moments come. I don't want to be so caught up looking for them that I miss all the other moments. So it's an interesting balancing game. And sometimes when I visit, I shoot and I have plenty to come back with. And there's other times where I visited and there's maybe 2 images from a 2-week trip, because I still want to live in that situation where maybe I'm experiencing them and not capturing them, which I'm okay with as well.
Great. So a lot of the images have these fences or bars, like this image that's up on the screen now, and there's a few others. And it seems like it creates like this cage. Is that something that you were thinking about while you were composing the images?
Yeah. The last 2 trips I went back were fairly rough in the sense of health matters and things like that. So I knew that it was probably going to be a while, and living with that idea of like attempting to live your life and create something for yourself outside of your family, but still feeling that draw. Back home, there's a lot of that in the sense of like bars and fences and keeping in, keeping out. And I thought it was really interesting because it's exactly how I was feeling and how I've been feeling being so far away from my mother. So I think that was like a big thing that became very intentional, because it does kind of show up in several images. And even when I was at a birthday party shooting my nieces, I couldn't help but just go straight back to like, she was in a bounce house behind this net, behind a fence, another level of like distance and separation in between the viewer and the subject. And I thought that was super important. And as far as defining it, I'm not too sure yet, but I think it's just a feeling at this point.
Great, thank you. So Talya, I'm going to jump back to your work. Thinking about the pandemic and its influence on everybody, how has the pandemic influenced your work?
When, last March, when it sort of hit, packed up, even though our studio, my husband is an artist too, and we share a studio, and we really could have stayed here, but for some reason we wanted to just go home and be home. It felt like a need to sort of go into shelter mode. And because we're both over 65, I'm just 65, but it's a little older, and we felt more vulnerable. And so my studio shrank to a plastic folding table of 4 feet by 2, and then just a box of some paints and inks, and then and just a pad of 9 by 12. And I was working much larger. And so it was really sitting down in a little corner, as I think I mentioned when we first were talking before we went live. We live in a very small house, but it's on the Hudson River. So this table was right by the window, and so my focus kind of became a combination of, checking in to see what are the numbers and what can we do and what we can't do, and is there enough toilet paper and is there enough food? I don't know what happened to me here. Hold on a second, something. And then basically just trying to work on a small scale and narrowing things down to a very focused place, and to notice the small things, which I think is part of the good stuff of this pandemic. It's noticing the details, being more grateful for what you have, and for the more delicate little things that you see, so that's really, so it was actually kind of challenging to work small, and it took a while, and then actually it became something that I was just working like crazy for several months right there at that little table, and produced, I don't know, about 30 small paintings. So I really enjoyed that part, I have to say. And so it was a mix of good and, of course, all the difficulty of it. I'm not sure if it changed anything else, but it certainly changed those, the scale and attention to detail more.
Yeah, you were able to focus on smaller pieces. Yeah.
And then it's just an interesting thing to have compositions that are just this small versus working much bigger. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. And Brigid, your third series that's in the show is a reaction to the pandemic as well, with the hand washing pieces and the teaching piece. That's probably one of my favorite pieces. So can you talk about that work and maybe where it's going?
Well, I had, seen work and seen images in the media, or I don't know, of course, online, about a response to the former administration, a response to COVID. I've seen a lot of anger, and I just wanted to keep things really simple. And I think that with the 3 themes that I've got, 3 series about COVID, about mental health, about immigration. I'm not like really seeing or presenting any simple answer. The complexity of the situation and the human cost, or in terms of education. So, just getting back to the COVID series, I guess we could call it, the hand washing. I think that, I really want to connect with people. I want to be really without, I just want to be, very, very simple, keep it very simple. So right now I'm working on, I'm continuing with a series about school and about COVID in COVID in the educational kind of arena. And that's something that it's affected me. It's affected most people, but I mean, I know, Jessica, it's affected you more because you're really there in the room with the students. And I just think that it's very, I've always been impressed by how ultimately students really try so hard, with whatever they've got, they really do make such an effort. And now with this, so I'm hoping that with this, that is what I'm focusing on in terms of COVID and school. And I'm also looking at that the playing field is not even in terms of, finances and sort of, our Black and brown, neighbors and students, et cetera. So these are all things that are in the media all the time, like it's kind of like bouncing tennis balls, I think, and I've been talking to some of my friends about, I've been reading this historian, Heather Cox Richardson, because she's very good at making sense out of it all. And there's just so many things going on. That's why I say it's like multiple balls, like hitting you all at once. So there's no shortage of like subject matter to work with. And I think that one of the things I want to address is the injustice of it, or just the surrealness of it. That if you ever described like, I don't know, COVID for one, but there are just so many things that are happening that are just very, very bizarre. Whether or not we've gotten used to it is another issue altogether. But just as I said earlier, I think trying to present this historical moment, the time we live in and what we know and what we shared knowledge and experience, that's where I'm trying to put out there.
Yeah, I think surreal is a very good word for our time right now. Yeah. And what you're saying about focusing on relationships and the small moments, hand washing or a student sitting at their laptop, it seems like all three of you are focusing on these more intimate moments in different ways. So I think there's a really nice connection between you in that way, like Erika with your family and these passing moments, and Talya with the smaller format. I guess my next step is, does anyone have questions? Do you have questions for each other?
How much, Erika, how much of your work is FaceTime? I find that fascinating because it's also very much of the time. So that the capturing of those moments and how, everybody's looking with the lens, with the wide lenses and so on. And then if it's all digital when you put it out, but when you have to print it, how does that work?
So most of the images in the show currently were shot on 35 millimeter negatives and black and white. And now in the last year, it's just evolved into these like snippets of FaceTime images, but a lot of them are live images. So it just adds to this like moment that was there and it disappeared, because now you can see that in action. So it's like little video clips. It's interesting. It's been frustrating on the artist end and frustrating on the human family end. But I have a nice little collection going now of the last year FaceTime versions of it, which hopefully will be something at some point. But yeah, I'm essentially just kind of feel like I've been holding my breath on both ends of that spectrum of being an artist and wanting to create and continue this work, and just wanting to be with my family. So hopefully those FaceTime ones will end soon, and maybe they'll be back on negatives again.
On the other hand, the FaceTime is what makes it very much of today. So there is there's a poignancy to that, which I think is really interesting.
That's true.
I also have a question for Erika. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about black and white, how the black and white color scheme works with your images? And what are your thoughts about color? Are you just in general, color photography?
So I'm happy you asked. That's when I started the work, it actually started in color. It started color and digital, and it just, in the beginning, it made sense. And then the more I was looking for that narrative or that moment, it just didn't feel like it did it any justice in color. So I started to kind of just play around with black and white and play around with film, and the idea that on film, I'm capturing this moment I can't see again until I develop and scan and digitize it. And then it just felt like it spoke to what I was looking for to begin with. It felt right to put these in a medium that would just take as long to process, as long to get to, for that specific moment that only lasted maybe a second. And I just thought there was some kind of beauty or justice to it being black and white.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a few questions from our audience. Let me just pull them up. Okay, so this question is from Tracy. Can you, let's see, what are you currently working on, and what are your plans for future work?
Directed at all of us, or specific?
Yes, whoever wants to answer.
Well, as I said earlier, I'm working on school in COVID. I'm continuing with the COVID in the present moment and how it's affecting students, and also just a diverse population. Okay. Also looking at food scarcity. So it's all around pandemic kind of mode. And the work is small, and it continues to be acrylic on I'm working on Yupo right now, Yupo paper. Yeah.
So I feel extremely self-centered because my work is not about social justice, and it's very much about what I feel. So it's kind of a little, but I'm working on a new series that's called What's in a Voice, because of what to me is sort of interesting, how we're born with a certain voice that seems to come out in different mediums, no matter what. And for me, going the 3 mediums that I've worked in. So that's really what I'm kind of looking at. What are those issues that I have worked with that seem to show up in everything and see how I can bring them together. So that's my non-pandemic. I'm so saturated.
I feel the same way. Beyond just like working on date and taking those portraits on FaceTime, my other work, it's still within the same mindset of process. It's heavy process based. It's essentially I'm distressing negatives and trying and attempting to create more paint-like images or results, and all with the idea of what destruction and having to pick those pieces up and create something with that, what that means or what it could even be to us just as humans experiencing all of this. So I guess in a sense, it's definitely influenced somewhat by the state of the world and the need to reconstruct and rebuild constantly. But it's one of those things where it's just a little far right from what I currently doing with date, at least until I can get back out there.
And there is one more question in the chat. And if anyone has another question in our audience, feel free to type it into the Q&A or the chat. So this question is also to all of the panelists. What has it meant to each of you to be able to share your work at this particular time, to be invited to share the work reflective of each of your parallel experiences during the pandemic?
I'll go first. I think it was super exciting for me. It's the first time I've ever had like a solo show or a show where I get to show as much of my work as I have. I've mostly just been involved in group exhibitions. So I was already very excited to be able to show a bigger array of these images. And then to be able to show them in a show where two other artists are expressing very similar feelings or experiences makes you feel seen and not alone, which was very important because it's been quite isolating. This whole experience has been, so to come into a show with two other female artists who are experiencing very similar things and are still working, which is really important and really exciting to me to be a part of it. So overall, just joy.
I was also very honored. This, I've been painting for about 8-9 years, and this is actually my very first solo painting exhibition. With my other work, I've had a fair amount of exhibitions, but so this was a very wonderful invitation, and I love the way Carl installed it in that space. And so I'm very honored. It's great, wonderful to see it.
I'm very thrilled to be showing at 5 Points again and to have such a beautiful space and to display the work. And, I also agree, Talya, that, Carl did a great job installing the work. And I'm really thrilled to be in this group of female artists and the sense of collaboration and that we're all working, despite what, the sense of isolation, and to know that there's an audience and that there's a kind of a hunger as usual, but perhaps even more so, is very energizing, I think. Art prevails, and I really feel very fortified by that. So it's been a really wonderful experience.
And I also just want to say that actually right now there's so much everything is so virtual, all these virtual exhibitions, and it's just not the same. And being able to have the work in an actual space where people can come in and see it and feel it is a wonderful opportunity today, especially. So I think that's wonderful that 5 Points is doing that.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. And there's some wonderful comments to the panelists in the chat. Hopefully we can save those at the end of the conversation. So does anyone in the audience have any other questions? Oh, here's one. Okay. So this is for Talya. Can you speak more about the idea of connective tissue in your work? The question says, I have a strong sense of bodies and things and feelings unraveling.
Sorry, a strong sense of what?
A strong sense of bodies and things unraveling.
Yeah, well, that's more in my sculpture. It's been a lot about, I was obsessed with spinal columns, and the armature was sort of the spinal column, and I used paper that was handmade paper that was like the connective tissue connecting the actual spinal column and then in the painting, I feel that the ink is a bit like a body sometimes. It definitely has a sense of armature in the lines. And then the paint is like a skin, which is the connective tissue, which connects and allows this sense of movement and also static and like capturing the line, you know, and freezing it as well. So, so that's sort of what I mean, for me, connective tissue is about the connection of different elements, you know, in that sense anyway.
So I don't think there are any other questions from the audience at the moment. So it was really nice to talk to all of you and to meet you, Talya. I think this was a very good conversation. It's really nice to see all of your work in person. So those of you who have not seen it, definitely please come down. And I really just appreciate the idea of connection that I see in all of your work. I think that's something that's really needed during this time right now. So I will hand things back over to Carl.
There is one more question.
Oh, okay. I guess there is one more question that just came in. Oh, I think it's where was the question, Carl?
In the Q&A. I guess it's not really a question, more of a comment.
Okay. All right. Hopefully there's a way we can save all of these comments because there's a lot of really great comments in the chat and the Q&A.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. This was a phenomenal talk. We will definitely post all these wonderful comments, and the recording will be available very soon. All 3 exhibitions are up through April 10th, and 5 Points Gallery is open Tuesdays and Thursdays, 1 to 4 p.m., and Thursday and Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 1 to 5. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our attendees. And everyone have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks.
All right, good night.
Bye.
Bye.